Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to give it another minute or so before we get started to give everybody time to join us from the lobby. I always feel like we need some music or something here. Always quiet.
Oh, sorry.
All right, I'll go ahead and kick us off today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rural Health Executive Educational Series. I am Cody Smith, and I'm the Director of Rural Partnerships and Leadership Development at NRHA Service Corporation, and I'm thrilled for today's session. Before we dive in, a couple things to know. This session is being recorded, and we will send that to everyone who registered later today, so no need to scramble for notes. You'll have everything at your fingertips. At the end of the session, there is a quick survey. If you could take a moment to fill that out, I'd truly appreciate it. Your feedback really does help us shape these sessions, and we want to make sure you're getting the information that is useful to you and your peers. Quickly, I'll cover a few housekeeping items. All attendees are muted to ensure the session runs smoothly. The presentation will last about 30 minutes, and this, well, 30 to 45 minutes. This does allow for some dedicated Q&A time at the end. But if you have a question, don't wait. Go ahead and drop it into the question section of your control panel as it comes to mind. This is your chance to ask our experts and get advice tailored to your challenges in rural healthcare. Today, we have two exceptional speakers, Jason Amrich, who is the CEO of Gunnison Valley Health, a critical access hospital in Colorado. With over 20 years in rural healthcare, he brings clinical and executive experience focused on improving access and outcomes. Jason also serves on several rural health boards and statewide coalitions. John Downs is a rural healthcare strategist with 25 plus years of experience in facility planning and market analysis. At Stroudwater Associates, he helps rural hospitals align services, space, and strategy to meet community needs. With that, I'll hand it over to our speakers so we can get started.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Cody. So today we're going to talk about how to take strategic planning and turn that into action, and really think about that in terms of a rapid approach. And we'll get into a lot of details about that in just a moment. Cody already did the introduction, so we don't have to do that again. But some of you may be asking, wait, I sat through a presentation like this not that long ago. And you're right. On August 15th, we presented to this same audience about strategic planning best practices. This time, we're going to focus on sharing a bit more about the process itself rather than overarching strategic planning. And that process is really about how can we get to a strategic plan quickly from the start to actual results, given your limited resources. I would argue that there are 6 keys to successful strategic planning. Number 1, do it when you're ready and able to focus. Jason can share his experience of kind of going through an EMR implementation in a little bit, but if you were in the midst of an EMR implementation, it's probably not the time to start your strategic planning because folks are already thinking about that. Compile and analyze data in advance. Share it with the planning team so that we all talk the same language. We're all working from a common foundation. Get the right people in the room. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about who are the right people, how do we get them there? Have some type of framework. I'll share a framework that we use. Jason had a framework that he used in a previous strategic plan. How do we bring those things together or use another framework that your organization is comfortable with? Prioritize and divide the efforts. This strategic planning is not a job for 1 or 2 or 3 people. It is a job for an organization. Yes, it's got to be managed by a smaller group, but we've got to think about how we can divide those efforts for the most important elements and track results consistently. It's not just about coming up with a plan, putting that plan on the shelf, coming back 3 years later and doing the plan again. It's about tracking those things so you know what is working and what is not working. So about streamlining it. The reason that I believe it's important to streamline a strategic planning process instead of taking a 3 to 6 to 9 month long engagement time is to keep focus, right? Recognize the resource limitations that you all have. I would say that, while we all have kind of economic limitations, we can't spend tons and tons of resources in order to do strategic planning. The number one resource limitation is often your time, because you as hospital executives, as providers, have day jobs, and those day jobs are not doing strategic planning. They're providing healthcare for the people in your community. So really thinking about how you can limit the amount of time and energy that you have to put into a strategic planning process. And finally, produce something that's actionable, something that you can measure and you can hopefully prove your success. Throughout the course of today, we're going to talk about three key things. Identify the key participants, understand the data that's required for looking at strategic planning, and incorporating a proven process and planning framework in order to get us that strategic plan. And we'll dig into each one of those in a bit. First, we're going to start with a question. And I think we're going to hope that this works. The GoToMeeting poll works for us, but how often does your hospital update its strategic plan? We'll give a minute or so to do this, or as we see responses coming on in there.
Yeah, it did launch and the people are voting, so thank you for that. We'll leave it open for just a couple more seconds.
I can see the votes coming in now. I will say it's super interesting. The early leader is interesting to me. We've got 53% of the vote in, starting to accelerate there. 55%, 56%. Whenever you want to close that off, Cody, we can do that.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and close it and share the results. Thank you, everybody.
Excellent.
All right.
Yeah, so it made a quick comeback. Originally, annually was leading. And I would say, I was expecting to see every 2 to 3 years. I am concerned about the 8% of you all that don't have a strategic plan or have no clue. Jason, what do you think about these numbers?
Yeah, I would agree. I think, especially in today's time frame with so many different forces coming at us every year, going past 4 years seems a little long to be able to react in real time with what's facing us. So every 2 to 3 years makes sense if that's the majority. And I wonder if some of the annual folks are also thinking we update it annually, but then we do a full sale kind of review and replacement every 2 to 3 years. That's kind of the cadence I know that we do. And I think at one point the strategic plan that I inherited was about 5 years long. That felt a little bit long for me. So now we're on that 2 to 3 year schedule, but definitely get with the board to review it every year just to make sure, are we on track? Are there market forces? And then obviously now this time, are there legislative forces that we have to react to that maybe are impacting our strategic plan?
Yeah, great point, Jason. We can have all the planning that we want, but if suddenly outside influences change that plan, what is it? Mike Tyson says everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face, and it feels like nowadays we're all taking a couple of punches. So really figuring out how do we go about updating that strategic plan on a cadence that works best for our organization. So how do we start? How do we get it going? I mentioned earlier, the timing. It's really important to ask yourself, are we ready to engage in strategic planning? If we're in the midst of an EMR conversion, we've got a facility project that is underway, under construction, our entire medical staff just left. Anything like that would take our focus away from being able to fully engage in planning probably says, well, maybe this isn't the right time. Also, identifying and acquiring key data in advance of beginning the planning. The last thing you want to do is start a plan, then say, okay, where's that data that we need to find in order to do that? And then the final thing, and we'll spend a lot of time talking about it, who are the right people to have at the table? It doesn't mean we have the CEO and the board chair and that's it, or the CEO, the board chair, and an outside consultant. We've got to identify who needs to be there, who might even want to be there, and who should be there. So,
Jason,
go ahead, Jason, please.
On that first bullet point about asking yourself if you're ready, I think one of the things that I would also encourage folks to do is, do you need to be, should you be ready? Meaning that so many folks, especially in rural healthcare, because so many folks are wearing different hats, we're so often putting out fires or really being so action oriented and deep into operations that I think finding that headspace and almost demanding of yourself, how would we make ourselves ready to get out of this day-to-day operation mode carve out some time to think about the future and that innovation and the strategies that we need to be thinking about is important, because it's pretty easy to have months go by, years go by, where you're just in knee-deep operations and fighting fires and fighting for your organization.
Yeah, I mean, great point, Jason. And that, I mean, frankly, this is why we've titled this, about the CEO panel on navigating challenges. Jason brings that perspective of, yeah, great, I am knee deep in all of these things, but I've got to force myself to get that headspace, because this is also important to do. So when we think about, taking a Hamilton reference of in the room where it happens, the number one success factor in my mind, as someone that works with lots of different organizations of different types, sizes, qualities, is the number one factor is the quality of the people in the room. I've had very, very, very smart executives inside of a room that were not good about mobilizing, not good about motivating. And that isn't necessarily going to be super helpful when you're trying to get people aligned with a strategic plan. It's much less about any external resource that you bring in and more about the internal local personnel of an organization. There are three big categories that I think about. The people that are required to be there, right? We cannot do a strategic plan if the CEO is not part of that discussion, right? Oftentimes the CFO, if there's a COO, those people need to be involved. I would argue that the board chair needs to be involved in that. But then there are the people that need to be there. We need information from them. I need someone from the medical staff in order to get buy-in. But the third category is the one that I find to be most interesting. It's the people that want to be there. And hopefully there are folks from the first two categories that also want to be there. But I do think that there's an opportunity in strategic planning when someone has an interest in what you're doing. If they can provide value, those folks may actually be quite important to the process. And so when we think about those people that want to be there, it's really important as an executive to think about, the personalities. Negative personalities in a room can infect the culture, not only of your organization, but of that room while we're trying to get this work done. If you know that you've got to deal with someone because they have to be there by title, by right, by whatever else, you need a plan of management in advance to be able to manage them so that they don't infect the rest of the organization. Another key piece is who could bring a broad yet unique perspective, right? We don't want someone that is only thinking about their world, but someone that's thinking about community need outside of the thing that they do most frequently. Who are the influencers internally and within the broader community? And oftentimes I'll look at medical staff in this area. We often see, well, the chief medical officer or the VP of medical affairs or the president of the medical staff has to be in here. But is that person the one who's the influencer among the medical staff? Or is there a newer provider in the community that really has the pulse of the community and the ear of other medical staff? Is that someone we'd want to bring into that discussion? Also, next level leaders. Strategic planning, I would argue, and Jason would love your perspective on this, I think it's an exceptional opportunity to grow and empower people bringing into our organization.
Yeah, I would agree with you, JD. And I think also it's a way to, reward leaders for thinking along those service line levels or strategic concepts and see that as that development of we want you to be a part of the strategic planning. We believe in your leadership and how you're leading your department or functional area. And then having that privilege to participate in the strategic planning, to be able to be with the board, other C-suite executives, as well as other medical staff, I think is really important. And finding out who those influencers are is really important too. We, I think at first blush went right to our medical directors. We have a strong dyad culture with administrators and physicians leading some of our service line areas. But to your point, there are still those long tenured physicians who may have been with the community for a while that have purposely not chosen a leadership career or position, but really do have the pulse of the practice, the pulse of the community, and then how can you involve them in all or even part of the strategic planning process?
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, you may have touched on it a little bit. I could have jumped straight forward, but a perspective from leadership. How did GVH decide on who was going to be in the room?
Yeah, for me, my leadership style is very collaborative, and I enjoy in really think an organization does better when we can get multiple stakeholders with different voices coming together to talk about what's happening from their perspective for a healthcare organization. So, and I think I'm blessed with a really engaged board. So the board chair was a no-brainer, and then obviously having the rest of my board, which are appointed, not elected. It's only 7 board members total. That helps keep the size down a little bit. But I knew that they were going to want to be there, absolutely a part of the process. My entire executive team was there as well, since they're going to be the ones obviously carrying out a lot of the action items and initiatives that we're talking about. And I would want them to be able to push back on, are we getting way too ahead of ourselves? Maybe, being too grandiose in what we're trying to do, and felt like they could help shape that. And then, like I said, looked at some more traditional medical exec leadership, medical directors, and then pulled both, I think, the board and my leadership team. Who else do we think from their perspective would benefit? And I think with that, though, it does come the expectation setting of, if we're inviting you, here's kind of the rules of good citizenship, right? Here's the expectations of participating. And it's not just coming in to levy a bunch of accusations or problems or just throw grenades over the fence. It's also to saying, here's how and why we can fix it, or here's why I believe it's important. And to know that with that privilege comes the responsibility to be able to help shape and prioritize the plans. And then that helped us, I think, go from a bigger list to a smaller list. Of course, there's always just calendar conflicts. So we did have some med staff conflicts that limited their ability, but we also tried to figure out where could they participate in certain parts of the process, right? If they couldn't be there for everything, but we needed them for a specific aspect, could we still engage a person there for that? And I think that created some buy-in.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Jason. So the next piece, we've kind of talked about getting the right folks in the room. Now it's about getting the right information in that room, either before, ideally, or at the very least, when we're all in the room together. So what data do we need? Obviously, when we think about doing strategic planning, we need to understand what you've done in the past. You need to understand what you've done in the past. And more than just one person in the organization understanding what they've done in the past, we need a common understanding. And that's why we try to get that data in advance, right? We want to make sure, if I look at data and I say you did 15,000 emergency visits, we don't want somebody else saying, well, we did 26,000 emergency visits last year, because they're defining it in a different way. So we use data in order to make sure we're at a common understanding. Financial statements, previous strategic plans. Again, the idea that we might have something that is 5 years old, or maybe we are on a cadence of 2 to 3 years. Let's not start from nothing. Let's start from where we were. Any future projections that you've already done or that you've brought organizations in to do become components of your strategic planning data. Demographic analysis, utilization, medical staff retirements and recruitments, things that you all know are happening. CHNAs, oftentimes the previous CHNA or the implementation plan drive the new strategic plan, and vice versa. The new strategies become part of the implementation plan of your future CHNA. Other things that are really important are specific local information, whether it's new and expanded industry that hasn't been, started yet, but it's about to come in. If we talk about we're suddenly going to, revitalize one of the energy industries in Wyoming, we're going to, revitalize coal again. All of a sudden, that has a significant increase in potential population. That potential population will then utilize healthcare services, and we may not have data that's currently encompassing that population. So we've got to be thinking about that. Housing starts that go along with it. Other significant risk factors, either things that are causing population surges, changes in federal priorities. We've all heard about that over the last several months. Competition that's either building something new, taking some of our volume, or on the other side, entire provider groups collapsing. I was working with a client that the local FQHC just collapsed, and they needed to absorb the primary care demand in that community. Those are things that need to be part of our strategic plan. When do we need it? Ideally, we have that at least a month in advance of the strategic planning session. And any reports and analyses can get done before you're in the planning session. Remember, and I'll talk about the process that we use at Stroudwater and the process that we've used with Jason and the folks at GVH is about making sure that we're efficiently utilizing the time of the organization. So consultant can do stuff on the outside, bring it in so that we can do the work on site with the client in the shortest amount of time possible, because the time with your team is too valuable to waste looking for data while we're all sitting around the table.
JD,
Another polling question. Oh, sorry, Jason. Yes.
I think the other unique thing about being data centric or data forward is it also dispels some of the feelings or assumptions that people bring to the table about what's happening in their market or organization. We're so busy, we had this, and I think you said, well, actually, we grew by only 4%. Or no, you're right, actually, we grew even more than that, and here's kind of the constraints. And sometimes we have biases or assumptions that aren't always confirmed by the data. And so I think that's really helpful to ground people into that current state. And that way they can project out what might be needed for the future.
Yeah, great point. Cody, can we run this poll?
Yeah, absolutely. 1 second.
Sure.
All right, there you go.
So what step in the planning process do you find the most difficult? Right? Is it gathering reliable data, not just grabbing numbers, engaging stakeholders, defining the priorities, measuring progress, or something else altogether?
Great, thank you. I do see people voting, so we'll go ahead and leave it up for a couple more seconds. All right. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. I'm going to go ahead and close and share the results now. Here you go.
Yeah, and I would say that those mirror what I typically see with clients. Jason, how do those work with you?
Yeah, same thing. I personally circled gathering reliable data. I just think, especially in rural healthcare organizations and small organizations, our data departments aren't as built out as larger health systems. And so while we have access to hospital system data or Chartis data, I think always, gathering and being able to discern what is true local reliable data is really important and is sometimes hard. And then I kind of had a split actually between the actionable priorities, which for sure is in that planning process, I think a little bit more towards the end of the process, and then the measuring progress. How do we make sure that we're using the right data? We have our observed to expected or whatever type of ratio we're looking at to determine whether or not the priority is actually making traction, but pretty similar to what's here on the screen.
Yeah, it seems pretty consistent with what I've seen in the past. So the process that I look at when I'm doing strategic planning, I think works, but again, is always modifiable to the needs of an individual organization. So starting, what are the steps? Align. Right? Make sure that we're all aligned. That's the goals of the process, and why are we doing it now? If we've got a bunch of people disagreeing, obviously it's not going to help us. The data. Align on the data. The organizing structures. I don't care whether you're using pillars, buckets, themes, initiatives, whatever the vocabulary is for your organization. If you don't have one, this is a time to start coming up with something so that we can at least ground people in a common understanding and a common vernacular about how we talk about our strategic planning. Also aligning on what's the desired output, what are we trying to accomplish, and what's the timeline in which we're going to do that. The next step, gathering perspectives, right? Whether those are individual interviews, group interviews, listening sessions, focus groups. And then the final step is really making the sausage. It's developing the plan itself. So Stroudwater does a 3-day intensive planning effort. I found this. I've done strategic planning in the traditional sense of 6 months long. Lots and lots and lots of interviews, lots of engagement, kind of sausage making behind the scenes, and then coming back out and presenting that. And then I've done it this way probably for the last 10 years. And I think this is just a more efficient way, particularly in smaller rural hospitals, although I've done this for larger community and academic medical centers as well. But we call it the Rapid Strategic Plan. And it's really a 3-day event. The first event is about that alignment setting, right? It's kicking off a presentation to say, what is the future of rural healthcare? We're going to use a whole bunch of words over the course of this strategic plan with the board, the medical staff, and the administration. Let's make sure that we all mean the same thing when we say the same words. During that alignment session, that kickoff, we introduced the planning framework for organizing the plan. It's kind of, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you what I told you. And so introducing that on the beginning so that folks understand gives us an opportunity to come back to it and build the plan using that. And then informal discussion among management, medical staff, board members. This is great over a dinner, right? This is just folks talking about what the community needs, what are the concerns. It's not formal, it's very informal. Day 2 is all about gathering perspectives. It's individual interviews with key senior leaders, providers, board members. Sometimes people don't like to be in individual sessions. They'd rather be in group sessions. 2 caveats with the group sessions. One, in some states where we've got sunshine laws, put 2 board members in a room together and suddenly we've got a board meeting and that has to be publicized. We don't want to put any of those types of things during strategic planning into the public domain. We're really thinking about the organization and want to do that as off the record as possible. The other caveat to group sessions is that sometimes folks sit there and they don't participate. The quieter perspectives get overrun by the folks that have lots of things to say. So we do have to be careful, and that's on your facilitator to be able to draw that out of folks. The third day is really about building the plan. And it's taking that common data set, historical and future projections. What were the common themes that we heard in all of those interviews? What are those biggest issues or areas of concern that have been identified? And how do we begin grouping those using your chosen framework? And this was a process that we went through with the folks at GVH last summer to really kind of craft that strategic plan.
JD, I think one of the things that was unique for me with this RSP format was that gathering perspectives piece. I've definitely done a lot of strategic planning in those group sessions, and you sort of keep those groups. And whether that's, obviously ideating on a SWOT or a SOAR analysis, and it's great, you get a lot of good feedback, but you do lose those quieter perspectives that you mentioned. And I sometimes get frustrated where I know a leader has a lot to say, but that group session just doesn't allow for them to, or enable them to talk. So I think the interview sessions that we did were really helpful to get good, transparent information, concerns, needs, desires for where the health system needed to go from these different stakeholders. And I really like that. And of course, having an effective facilitator is always good. In the past, I have facilitated and participated combo for strategic planning. And while I think I maybe did a good job, really it pays to be, as that CEO senior leader, more participant than facilitator. So having a really good facilitator to be able to guide your group through that, I just can't recommend that enough, because you do lose being able to be that person to join in with the rest of the group instead of trying to simultaneously facilitate and join in. But that, the individual interviews, and then even we were able to customize it, kind of knowing, yeah, this person's not going to want to be by themselves, and then to group them together so that they could engage in that conversation. That really allowed for robust feedback.
Yeah, and I would just follow up on Jason's comment about the difference between the CEO or someone like the CEO doing those interviews or doing the actual facilitation versus someone else. It doesn't have to be a consultant. It can be somebody in the organization that is able to keep kind of a level of confidentiality between the person sharing their opinion and what gets displayed to everyone else. And one of the pieces that I'll always say to folks when we're doing those meetings is, I am not going to identify who said what. If you're the only person that tells me one particular thing, I'm going to keep it on a notepad, but it's probably not going to become part of the organizational plan going forward. If lots of folks say something, it's going to be identified as a theme and something that we've got to bring through. But that's a much easier thing for a consultant or an outside party to be able to provide than it is for well, I'm not going to tell Jason because he's the CEO. And even if he says he'll keep it quiet, I don't know if I can really trust that he's going to keep it quiet. Jason's a very trustworthy gentleman, but that is certainly a concern that I've observed with folks. And I do think having kind of a neutral third party to be able to do that is certainly helpful. So taking strategic planning, it's all about kind of looking at the vision of the organization, grouping that into themes. Those themes become goals and action items, and that's kind of the strategic planning process. You'll notice I've got kind of an orange box or a golden box around the strategic planning process. The tactical planning and measurement piece, while it has to dovetail with the strategic planning process itself, I would argue is best delivered by the next level leaders and departmental managers. They may not have been in on the strategy, but if I say our goal is to grow imaging volume by 15% in this sub area of our market, well, the person who's likely going to be responsible for doing that is someone in imaging, the imaging manager, perhaps together with the provider alignment person that's working in the organization. They can craft those tactical plans, and then we can come back and say, are we able to measure that appropriately? So we think about that organizing structure, vision to strategic themes to strategic goals. Those strategic goals, I would argue, should each have an overall goal leader from the senior leadership team. If we're successful in developing a strategic plan, there is to be a document at the end where the senior leadership team or the C-suite or whatever you call yourselves can sit around the table and everyone is assigned something in there. We say, okay, are we executing on this? For each one of those goals, action items might need to be developed. Those could be someone from the senior leadership team or could be designated or assigned to someone that's a next level leader. Tactical planning, what are the process steps, the actual sausage making inside of diagnostic imaging to grow volume there? And then finally, the measurements and metrics. Is there an end metric we're striving for, and by when? We will get to be a Leapfrog A hospital. Well, that takes some time. If you're a C today, you're not going to get that next quarter. Is there a progress metric we're looking to achieve in the interim? We will decrease falls on the unit by 2% next quarter, or whatever it may be. Those are important pieces for us to identify as we begin putting together that strategic plan. I mentioned that we've got to have some type of framework to organize things. And for those that sat through the August presentation that Stroudwater did for NRHA, this is the framework that we call the transition framework. And it's all about aligning the delivery system, kind of the top half of the graphic, the quality and efficiency, primary care providers, service area network with the payment system. We can't do things to fix our payment system if we're not doing simultaneous things to fix our delivery system. As an example, if we suddenly jumped into a pure, risk-based payment and we said, okay, we're going to go all in on population health, but we haven't yet figured out how to get paid for doing that. And at the same time, we said one of the important things for us to do is drive emergency volume down, imaging volume down, procedural volume down, because that's going to decrease overall costs. Well, if we're not getting paid to do any of those things, all we've done is put Jason and his team out of a job. Jason, how does the board feel when we drive volumes down without increasing some way to pick up the money?
I don't want to be ahead of that.
Yeah, we really want to make sure that those things are done in lockstep. So when we look at developing themes, we came up with 4 themes. One is around improving quality, efficiency, safety, operating performance. That's the here and now. Those are the things that if we do all of those things, it only is to our benefit. There's very little that would be negative in that. Second, aligning our providers. This says primary care providers, but frankly, I would argue it's all of our providers and not just employed providers. It's all of the providers inside of our service area. Rationalizing the service network. Theme 3 is how do we take bigger systems of care? How do we not continue a medical arms race? Everybody wants to offer an MRI. Well, if there are only 100 MRIs in your market, is it really cost effective for you to do that if the next nearest hospital is 35 miles away and someone can go get an MRI over there? Those are the types of things that we're thinking about in transforming the delivery system. The middle bar, theme 4, is all about creating that population-based health system, right? We can't go from 0 to 60 right away. Think of it as a crawl, walk, run, sprint piece. We've got to start with understanding the data, evidence-based protocols, care management practices. That's where we need to be today. As we move out into the future, then we can think about how are we contracting with payers and networks? How are we attributing value? Then we get into risk management, plan design, and a true population-based health system. And finally, the transformation of payment system, starting from the bottom up as opposed from the top down. Our own employees, those are folks that we're often responsible for in terms of cost. Can we do something with them that we're able to improve our bottom line by changing the way that our own employees are utilizing healthcare services? Next, shared savings payments, finally moving into a full risk payment. And so those strategic themes become the elements that we use to achieve the vision. So Jason, you had a whole bunch of other kind of pillars and groupings from previous strategic planning. How did you incorporate those into the process?
Yeah, I think what helped us out was utilizing that framework that you just mentioned, and thinking about what I know that Eric Shell talks a lot about, how form follows function follows payment, and then where are we at in that continuum. And right now we're still dead fee for service, right? So the way GVH's future is solidified is if we have operational excellence and we can really thrive in this fee for service environment. So a lot of the things you see on the screen here were some legacy goals that we had from previous years that actually dovetailed nicely into that first theme of quality, patient safety, and operating efficiencies. And we actually went on to rename it organizational excellence with kind of the tagline, perform to thrive. One of the things I like to do is take a little bit of that strategic description, give it something that's catchy that I can then talk to my team about, to associates, to the board, and they can say, yeah, this is perform to thrive. We have to have people first, right? We have to have financial excellence. We need to have that decile patient experience. We need to be able to grow volume, grow our ambulatory services. All of those things are fundamental to operational excellence. And so we were able to nestle that under our operational excellence theme. And because that really is the payment model and the form and function that we're working under, the majority of our goals and action items, really for the next 2 to 3 years, are falling under that. We know for GVH to be sustainable, we have to be able to perform. And so that was really where we were able to look at what are our highest priority items that are going to make the biggest impact, while trying to figure out how to simultaneously prepare for a current and maybe a more prominent shift to value-based payments or value-based care. And so that was really important for us to look at. And our provider network alignment, we talked about it as medical staff synergy. How do we unleash provider potential? Are looking at how do we collaborate, like JD said, instead of doing arms races. We talked about how do we build the future? How do we collaborate with maybe healthcare system down the road from us that we can share a provider that can serve both of our needs? And then again, just strengthening community health, and then looking at what's that value for our valley. I'm in a mountain valley, so I look at transitioning payment models. My goal as a CEO is also to provide value for healthcare services provided to that valley. And so that's another one that we're working on as well. So it was really great to be able to take those themes, that payment structured framework, and then build in some of the things that we know we still have to work on and nestle those underneath.
Yeah, and I think one of the important things, Jason came up with, I forget, it was the organized for something, whatever your first buzzword was just there. But the way that you can use a term, you can create that term and it becomes the organizational touchstone. Everybody knows, oh, of course, these things fall into that bucket. The important thing is that that's the buzzword from your organization. It's not the buzzword that came from Stroudwater or from the advisory board or from XYZ consultant. It is something that grew organically in Gunnison Valley, and that's really the important piece going forward. Last polling question for our for our discussion today, if you could run that, Cody. We're interested in what the most important focus of your hospital's strategic plan right now is. Is it financial sustainability, improving outcomes for patients, developing our workforce, engaging with the community, something else altogether?
All right, I do see everybody is starting to vote. Thank you so much for that. We'll leave it open just a couple more seconds to get these votes in.
We've got one that is running away with it.
I see that. That's pretty impressive.
So this could have been a one-question survey, I suppose, or a one-option survey.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could probably close it off, Cody. But financial sustainability dominated, as we all would expect right now. I mean, we are in a scenario of I overuse the term unprecedented, but unprecedented challenges to rural healthcare. And I think the bigger part of unprecedented is the unprecedented uncertainty about healthcare. Where are we going to be 1 week, 1 month, 1 year from today? I don't know that any of us or any of our strategic plans really have a clue. I want to just walk through. These are really quick, but these are probably after doing, in the last 3 to 5 years, doing 25 to 30 of these rapid strategic plans. Many of the same things emerge across all of your communities. So that theme 1, quality, patient safety, operating efficiencies, becoming the employer of choice, growing volumes or share, increasing efficiency and utilization of our clinics, identifying newer alternative revenue sources, ensuring financial sustainability. We kind of saw that just now in our highest question. Completing facility plans, staff and community housing. These come up in some derivation of these are probably in 75% of all of the strategic plans that I've done over the last several years. So if those are the same 7 things that you all are seeing, know that you're not alone. The key is, how do we identify each one of those themes, or this theme, those become action items or goals, and we've got steps underneath in order to help execute on those.
Yeah, JD,
Yeah, please, Jason.
In our planning, out of our 5 different themes, we had 16 goals and 79 action items. Theme 1 alone, which is operational excellence, which really dovetails exactly what we have on the screen, was 7 goals and 50 action items, right? And I think that really talks about the current environment that we're all in, trying to maintain financial stability and operational excellence. And I think one of the things to think about too, strategic planning, is you're not going to always come out of strategic planning with this incredible, like, brand new idea that nobody's thought of, that this is our new strategic plan. It's kind of like Occam's razor, right? Sometimes the most obvious answer is right in front of you. And we know with the current form and environment, excelling in operational excellence is right there. So it was great to confirm that through this process, and then really drill into what are our highest priority action items over the next year to 3 years that we have to do that. And so that's why I do think, like, we're all experiencing this, but we all have likely different tactics or action items to accomplish that.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. We think about theme 2, it's all about the providers, medical staff development plans, trying to grow specialty care in rural areas, relationships with external providers, referral patterns and contracting. All of those start to, be similar across, whether it's a large critical access hospital or a very, very small, very, very rural critical access hospital. These are the things that folks are asking for, or that we're showing a demand for inside of a market. The key is, all right, well, all markets are different, right? Jason's market is significantly larger than, a very small critical access hospital community. How do his action plans look at these things versus that small provider? I will say, almost to a person, when I do interviews, when I go out to a critical access hospital that is not yet affiliated, the number 1 theme, or the number 1 action item before anything else, is, how do we maintain independence? I want to be independent. I don't want to be acquired by, pick the 800-pound gorilla system that lives nearby. How do I do that? Yet I need capital for my facility project and I might need an EHR. How do I go about doing those things? It was no different at Gunnison, right, Jason?
Right, exactly.
Looking at that big bar in the middle, population health management, how do we improve access to care? How do we start thinking about our care management processes? If we don't have them today, how do we develop them or how do we make them better? And who's getting the attribution of value, right? If we keep someone from needing to go to our emergency department, that's great for the patient, that's great for the overall healthcare system. It may not be so great for us as an organization because we don't get the revenue of that patient showing up in the emergency department. So until we can figure out a way to monetize that creation of value, we've got to think about some way to attribute that value creation. On the payment system, whether it's ACO or direct contracting, folks are looking at alternative payment models, maximizing incentives for health-related activity, targeting percentages of revenue from non-fee-for-service. What's the first step I can make into a non-fee-for-service world and say, do I want next year or in 3 years, 15% of my revenue, 30% of my revenue to come from non-FFS sources? Employee health opportunities, are there things we can do in conjunction with our third-party administrators in order to move our employee health up and our costs down? So when we think about that first theme, again, I might have taken this partially from you, Jason, but if it's quality, patient safety, and operating efficiency, the goal, how do we explore, maintain, and expand services to increase volume and share? Action items, what do those start to look like? Proactive approach to internal discharges and tertiary centers to achieve a swing census of 5, right? That's something, whether it's 5, it's 2, it's 3, it's 15, whatever it might be. If that's a piece, now the next level leader, whether it's the CNO, it's the director of nursing, it's the nurse manager or the case manager, they take action item A and then build out tactics for making that happen. We're going to call XYZ hospital every day at 8 a.m. to find out whether or not they've got opportunities. Looking at average daily acute and observation census growth, communication strategy to engage our community, growing volumes by a certain percentage for outpatient surgery, market growth of ancillary volumes. It's important that all of these things then have next level steps in order to further execute. And I mentioned earlier, it's important to divide and prioritize. Jason or any CEO, no matter how brilliant, cannot be responsible for everything. The entire team can't focus on everything at once. It's important for us to ask a couple of key questions. What is mission critical, right? Mission critical is we may close, right? We do this or we don't do this and the organization closes, goes away tomorrow, or we have a safety issue that must be addressed. What requires something else to happen first, right? If it requires something else to happen first, then by definition, the thing that we're talking about, not the something else, needs to be secondary priority because we have to get that initial enabling task done. When is it reasonable to complete a goal or a task, right? It's one thing to want, wanting builds character, but what is actually reasonable to achieve? And then try to group those things into, here's the low-hanging fruit we have to get done in the next 6 months. 6 to 12 months, we're going to do these things. 12 to 18 or whatever our next bucket, we'll do these things. And anything beyond 18 months, that may make it into this strategic plan. It may be something that we have to think about in our subsequent strategic plan. But Jason, how did you all think about kind of grouping? I know these are the 4 categories that we used with you all, but how did you think about putting things into them?
Yeah, and we utilize sort of an iterative and ongoing process. I think one of the things that complicated our strategic planning for this year is I go live with Epic in 16 days, 15 days. And I'm transitioning from 3 or 4 health records into a community connect model with Epic and UC Health. So you can imagine the amount of organizational resources and focus that is taking to do that. So that obviously became mission critical. That is goal 1. We've termed it Be Epic, fully leverage information technology and digital health innovation to serve the needs of our community. And we realize that's going to take us through June, if not July. With that as sort of the knowledge of how much time and effort we're going to be using, Then we tried to figure out what is high priority. High priority was in that role, that 6 to 12 months. What's going to take us through the rest of 2025? Medium is sort of over the next 12 months to year. And then important but non-urgent is, yeah, 3 years from now, we'd love to have some traction on that. And then we basically looked at all of my management team and I looked at all the action items, different themes, and we went through and kind of beat it up together. And we each individually rated, had conversations of why we thought it was this way or not that way, and then ultimately came up with a decision of, yes, we are going to sign our names next to this high priority item, saying that we're going to commit to finishing this year. I think that was really important to have the team in the room together saying, we're putting our name on this. Here's a metric that we're doing. We're going to report this out to the board. Are we okay with that, right? Like, we're signing up for this. I do think our strategic planning this year, given just the complexities of going live with Epic, in July, we're going to sit down with the board again. I don't think our themes are going to change and our action items are going to change. We may still go back through this mission critical, high priority, medium priority, and review that and say, you know what, like, we're going to have to kick some of these mediums off, or maybe even a high priority has to come off because of where we're at with our Epic conversion. So I look at it truly as that ongoing process, and my job as CEO, right, is to really decide where do we put our focus and resources on. Is that in alignment with where the board is? And then how do I message and create the objective performance with that? So while we're going through Epic, though, as we think about that mission critical, our high priority is I have to have financial excellence, both on my financial operations and my revenue cycle team, right? So we can't let that go. And then if I don't drive volume or utilization of my services, I don't have cash coming through the door. And I can't do that without a really good, engaged, high quality workforce. So those were the three natural ones that came up to high priority. And as you can imagine, a lot of things we focus on are also on medium priority. And because that form follows function, follows payment, quite frankly, some of that transition to alternative payment models are urgent, are important, but not urgent. I'm taking the tact of how can I learn as an organization? How can I keep that percolating on one of my back burners? But I know it's not something I'm going to action on for a couple of years. However, what I don't want to have happen is when all of a sudden maybe something turns to value-based, I'm not all of a sudden saying, hey, we should do something about this, right? How is my organization learning in the background to be ready while we're still trying to thrive in that fee-for-service environment? And like I said, I believe it's an iterative and ongoing process, and we as executives and leaders need to help that team narrow it down. And that's probably something I still need to work on. I'm sometimes guilty of wanting to do too much with too little time. And it's really a disservice to the organization if we're not giving them things that we can accomplish in the time that we're saying that we can do it in.
Yeah, great point. And you know, we talked about the need for measurement. Whatever the tool looks like for your organization, it's important to have some tool for tracking. You know, understanding here are the goals, here are the targets, here's the frequency that we're looking to update. You know, what's been happening over time. We want to make sure that we're increasing the efficiency of communication, but at the very least, please don't waste anyone's time tracking information that's not important. So again, just to kind of bring us all together, and we'll take some questions. Keys to success: do it when you're ready and able to focus. You know, Jason wouldn't start strategic planning now in the midst of the Epic conversion. You know, we did strategic planning before the Epic conversion got hot and heavy. Pull that data together in advance and share it with the team to build a common foundation. Have the right people in the room. Look for them, you know, under the couches, behind the curtains. Find the folks that want to be in that room. Utilize some kind of framework. I don't care what it is, but make sure that you're organizing it in a way that's meaningful for your organization. Prioritize and divide the efforts. One person can't do it all and nobody can do everything. And track results consistently. With that, ask Jason all the questions that you might want because he's the expert here.
Well, thank you for all the information today. We do have quite a few questions that have come in. I just want to let everybody know, go ahead and continue to put your questions in. If we don't get to them today, I will be sure that the team, Jason and John, get them and they will reach out with some answers for you. So I'm just going to dive in here. Who should drive putting together the strategic plan? Is this leadership like a CEO or the board that should drive the completion of the strategic plan? Similarly, who owns the plan? It's clear that leadership is responsible. Just curious on perspective of who should own it.
Yeah, I'll dive into that. So what I liked about this approach that we did last year is while we had lots of board of trustees engagement, we did have a time to work directly with Stroudwater based on all the information that we had learned from the prior day, and really as a management team sit down and say, yes, I agree with those themes, or no, this is different from where my operational leaders are sitting. And then we presented a plan back to the board to say, this is management's really blessing or best effort with this. What do you guys think? And so I did appreciate a little bit of that separation to allow us to have maybe some more difficult conversations that we needed just as an operational team, and then still keep some, I guess, some guidelines between the board's role in setting strategy and governance, but truly where operations knows that we're going to be the ones stuck leading this and figuring out how to execute on it. And so being able to have the operational team lead that, ultimately I need the board approval to go forward, but I did appreciate that we led that a little bit more specifically this year. And then, you know, from an ownership perspective, I'm an extreme ownership guy. If any of you guys are Jocko Willink fans from his podcast and book, and ultimately CEO owns the whole thing, kit and caboodle, all the performance, and then it's incumbent upon me to report out to my board chair and to the board why we're on track, off track, what to expect. And I try to use some of that same framework and information in my reporting back to my board, usually during quarterly updates of here's our performance, here's our on track, off track, you know, judgment. And then even have conversations like, yeah, we softballed this goal, we hit it already. I think in hindsight, we should have made it more difficult. Or if we're on a goal that I feel like we're off track and it just seems like we're going to really struggle, having those conversations, and then maybe even saying, yeah, we set the wrong goal, or we should think about reframing it. And then how do I have that conversation with my board to just say, is there opportunities in midstream to adjust where our strategic plan is?
Great, thank you.
Great answer.
Yeah, thank you so much. Another question that came in. So this is about one of your specific slides. So the previous slide spoke about strategic themes to achieve the vision. Are those themes dictating the vision of the organization?
Yeah, so I would say that it's almost the other way. The organization has the vision, and then the themes are there to support getting to that vision. So it's not the themes dictating the vision, but rather the vision setting the direction for the organization. The themes need to be built into how we can support that.
Okay, great, thank you. Strategic plans are always tailored to the organization. However, are there some samples that can be shared, like GVH's strategic plan, to highlight how they structure and track their outcomes?
I'll let Jason share about GVH in particular. I think that there are samples that we can share relative to how folks have structured and tracked outcomes that are blinded, as opposed to, you know, sharing someone's strategic plan. I think oftentimes, you know, I wouldn't want to say XYZ hospital did this and have XYZ hospital's name right there, or XYZ hospital plans to do this, because if for some reason that were to fall into the hands of XYZ's competitor, we don't necessarily want them to know what's going on. But we can share some example tracking tools that have been blinded. Jason, anything to add to that? Did I capture that okay?
I'm happy to look at my tracking tool that I'm currently using right now, because it's not populated with first quarter data yet, and see if that would be of benefit to share with people. It's an Excel format, which I think is okay. I'm a big lean guy, so visual management is really important. Color coding, being able to look at something and immediately see if something is performing or not performing, I think are good basics. I'm always trying to strive to a kind of glossier, prettier version of my strategic plan and dashboard, but sometimes just out of necessity, settling for something that is more functional. So yeah, I think we can look at that.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'll make sure you have the contact information so you guys can get together. There are so many questions, and unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to all of them because we are almost at time. I'm going to ask one last question, and then John and Jason, I'll turn it over to you for closing remarks before I end us for the day. So what level of transparency do you suggest once the strategic plan is completed? Do you send the plan to all staff, share with the community, etc.?
So in general, I would say that depends on the kind of relationship that you have with your staff and with your community. If you are the only game in town, then I think, being able to share that more broadly is certainly appropriate. If you're in a community where there are multiple competing organizations, that would be something where I might not share the entirety of the plan, but might put together a one-page summary of here's where our organization is going to go. Jason, you guys are kind of in the middle. You've got some folks that are near enough to compete with, but not right next door. What do you think there?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and this is something I actually ask myself: how am I performing in this realm? And I think I'm actually underperforming in how well I've communicated it out, both to my own organization and to just the broader community. And I definitely feel like my strategy is my strategy, and it's just up to my team to execute on it. I'm less concerned about a competitor having some access to it, because I just got to get there first, right, in action on it. I think as I reflect on our strategic plan, all the craziness that went into getting ready for Epic, we've even made some pretty big wholesale changes in our revenue cycle, partnerships, and functionality. And I do think that slowed down and has slowed down my dissemination or repetition back to my own leadership team and to my frontline staff. So I think that's something we need to do a better job on. I think my senior management team gets it, my board gets it, but I'd like to do more in the lines of having that annual kind of meet with the CEO, state of the state healthcare. I think Vail Health does a great job of that here in Colorado. Will Cook's often doing that, right around this time of year or March. And that's something that I want to do, because I believe then when I get the community behind me, or really understanding where we're going, that just creates better synergy. And of course, making sure all of our associates in our organization and all of our leaders know. And I just don't think I've hit the repetition enough on that with my organization.
Thank you. Thank you so much. John, Jason, any closing remarks?
No, I'd say thank you all for your attention. It was great to see so much response on the poll questions. I wish we could have gotten to more of your individual questions, but certainly we've got a list of those that were put into the chat box. As part of our information, you've got certainly my contact information, and I am very happy to send questions as appropriate over to Jason, or you can reach out to him directly, and I will send any information that I can to folks. So thank you all very much. Please stick around for a couple of seconds to fill out a review, because it is helpful for us to understand what resonated, what didn't. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. This session was recorded, so you will receive an email with that link to the recording later. Thank you for mentioning the survey, John. That is really important to us. And I also want to give a great big thank you to Stroudwater Associates for your support as a platinum partner within NRHA. Your commitment is so important to us, and we appreciate all your support. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Cheers.